The old lighthouse stood skeletal against the bruised twilight sky, a monument to decay. To Alex, it was a fitting tombstone for a life that had ended 5 years ago, even though his heart stubbornly kept beating. He and his German shepherd, Major, were the sole occupants of this crumbling spit of land, a place where the wind howled with the voices of ghosts. To anyone else, the property was worthless, a ruin of rotting wood, rusted iron, and shattered glass. But the dog, with an intuition that bordered on supernatural, knew of a secret hidden within its salt-scoured walls, a Cold War legacy worth millions that would force Alex to confront the very past that had sent him here to die. We are so grateful for your viewership. Please support us by subscribing to our channel and letting us know in the comments where you are listening from. We love hearing from our global family. The Atlantic gnawed at the granite foundation, a relentless, hungry sound that had become the metronome of Alex's days. He sat on the cracked stone steps, the bottle of whiskey cool against his palm, its amber contents a promise of temporary oblivion. Each night was the same ritual. He would watch the sun bleed out over the horizon, drink until the memories blurred, and pray not to wake up. But he always did, with the salt spray on his face and Major's cold nose nudging his hand, a silent, furry judgment. Tonight, as he raised the bottle to his lips, Major moved. The dog, a creature of disciplined patience, suddenly planted a heavy paw on his forearm, pushing it down. A low, guttural whine rumbled in his chest, not of aggression, but of profound pleading. Alex tried to shake him off. "Get down, boy!" The dog didn't budge. His grip, gentle but firm, was an anchor. His amber eyes, impossibly intelligent, held Alex's gaze. In them, Alex didn't see a dumb animal. He saw a reflection of the promise he'd made to his wife, Sarah, the day they'd brought the trembling puppy home. "You'll look after him if anything happens to me, won't you, Alex?" The memory was a shard of glass in his gut. He had failed her in life. He couldn't fail her in this. With a shuddering sigh that felt like it was dredged up from the deepest part of his soul, Alex lowered the bottle. He didn't put it aside. He stood, walked to the edge of the cliff, and let it fall into the churning surf below. It vanished without a sound. Major watched it go, then looked back at Alex, his tail giving a single, hopeful thump against the stone. The dog then turned and trotted back toward the lighthouse door, pausing to look over his shoulder, a clear and undeniable summons. "Come on, enough of this. We have work to do." Alex's hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the sudden, terrifying absence of his crutch. For the first time in years he was facing the night sober. The lighthouse loomed, no longer a tomb, but a challenge. He followed the dog inside. The interior was a disaster, a physical manifestation of his grief. Dust motes danced like frantic spirits in the thin shafts of moonlight that pierced the grime-caked windows. The air was thick with the smell of mildew, salt, and neglect. For months he had lived in a small, cleared-out space in the keeper's cottage attached to the tower, ignoring the rest of the structure as if it were contagious. Major, however, had other plans. He led Alex past the small kitchen and into the base of the tower itself, a circular room filled with rusted machinery and rotting crates. The dog went straight to the massive stone fireplace, a black maw that hadn't seen a fire in decades. He began sniffing intently at the hearth, his nose twitching, his tail held low and stiff with concentration. He pawed at a single, dark slab of granite, looking back at Alex with an expectant whine. "What is it, boy? A mouse?" Alex ran a hand over his tired face. This was pointless. But the dog was insistent, scratching now, the sound of his claws on stone echoing in the cavernous space. Alex knelt, his bad knee protesting with a sharp crack. He ran his fingers over the stone Major had indicated. It was no different from the others, coated in the same layer of soot and grime. He pushed on it. Nothing. He tried to pry at the edges with his fingernails, but the mortar was solid. Major whined again, a high, frustrated sound, and nudged Alex's hand with his wet nose, pushing it toward the bottom edge of the stone. Alex sighed, humoring him. He felt along the bottom edge, his fingers tracing the rough-hewn surface, and then he felt it. A small, almost imperceptible indentation, no bigger than a thumbnail. It wasn't natural. It was machined. His training, dormant for years, flickered to life. The ingrained discipline of his EOD days, the meticulous search for the out-of-place, the telltale sign of a hidden mechanism. He pressed the indentation. A low, grinding click echoed from deep within the chimney. The stone slab shifted inward by a fraction of an inch. Alex's breath caught in his throat. He worked his fingers into the new gap and pulled. The heavy stone swung inward on a well-oiled hidden hinge, revealing a dark, square cavity. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with wax twine, was a small, leather-bound book. Major sat back on his haunches, his breathing a quiet pant, as if to say, "See, I told you?" Alex reached into the cavity, his heart hammering against his ribs with a strange mix of fear and excitement. The package was cool and dry to the touch. He carefully untied the twine and unfolded the stiff oilcloth. The book was a keeper's log, its leather cover cracked with age but still supple. On the first page, in elegant, faded cursive, was a name, Arthur Vance, Keeper of the Light, 1962. Alex carried the journal back to his small living space, the only corner of the property he'd made habitable. He lit a kerosene lamp, the warm glow pushing back the oppressive shadows. Major lay at his feet, his head resting on his paws, watching Alex with an unwavering gaze. The air suddenly felt different, charged with a significance that had been absent for 5 long years. He opened the journal. The first several entries were exactly what he expected. Meticulous records of weather patterns, fuel consumption for the lamp, sightings of passing ships. Arthur Vance had a precise, scientific hand. But as the pages turned, the tone began to shift. Sprinkled among the nautical observations were notes of a different kind, written in a simple substitution cipher. It was a code Alex recognized instantly, a basic field cipher he had learned in his first weeks of training. A child's puzzle to him, but effective enough to deter a casual reader. He pulled a pen and a stained napkin from the cluttered table and began to transcribe. The decoded messages spoke of unusual radio traffic, nighttime visitors in unmarked boats, and the package. It became clear that this lighthouse was more than a navigational aid. During the height of the Cold War, it had been a clandestine listening post for naval intelligence, a silent guardian watching the shipping lanes for Soviet submarines. Arthur Vance was not just a keeper, he was a sentinel. A deep sense of connection resonated within Alex. He understood this man's quiet vigilance, the lonely weight of a secret duty. He read on, deciphering page after page, the story unfolding like a ghost confession. Vance had intercepted a coded broadcast, a communication not from the Soviets, but from a rogue element within their own intelligence community. It detailed a plan to sell sensitive naval technology, sonar blueprints, to a foreign power. Vance had recorded the transmission, the package, and hidden it, realizing the conspirators were closer to home than anyone suspected. He wrote of his growing paranoia, of feeling watched. The final coded entry was chilling, they know. A man came today, a developer he called himself, wants to buy the point, says he'll build a hotel. His eyes were wrong. He wasn't looking at the land. He was looking for something in the tower. I refused him. He will be back. I have secured the package in the heart of the light. If I fall, may the next keeper be a man of conscience. The last dated entry was October 23, 1964. After that, the pages were blank. Alex felt a cold dread creep up his spine. He searched online using his satellite internet connection, the signal weak and intermittent. He found a brief report from a local newspaper archive. On October 25, 1964, lighthouse keeper Arthur Vance was reported lost at sea, swept from the rocks by a rogue wave during a storm. His body was never found. It was no accident. Alex knew it with the certainty of a man who had seen death up close. Vance had been silenced. The mission was clear, passed down through half a century of silence and decay. He had to find the package. He had to finish what Arthur Vance had started, the whiskey, the grief, the slow suicide he'd been committing. It all felt like a distant dream. For the first time since Sarah's death, Alex had a purpose. He looked down at Major, who was now sleeping soundly, a soft snore escaping his snout. "You knew, didn't you, boy?" he whispered, scratching the dog behind his ears. "You knew there was something here." The dog's tail thumped twice on the floorboards, a quiet confirmation in the lamplight. The next morning Alex woke before dawn, a feeling of clarity cutting through the fog of his usual hangover-less hangover. The restoration of the lighthouse was no longer just a way to pass the time. It was a strategic necessity. He started with the basics, boarding up the broken windows, clearing the debris from the tower room, and repairing the leaking roof of the cottage. The physical labor was a balm. The ache in his muscles grounded him, the rhythm of hammer, and saw a welcome distraction from the ceaseless loop of his own dark thoughts. Each repaired rafter, each new pane of glass, felt like a small victory against the decay that had consumed both the lighthouse and his own spirit. He found a rhythm to his days. Mornings were for labor, afternoons for studying Vance's journal and planning his search, and evenings were for quiet reflection, sitting with Major on the steps and watching the sea, not as an enemy, but as a silent witness. He began talking to Major, narrating his thoughts, his plans. The dog would listen, his head cocked, his amber eyes seeming to understand. He was no longer just a dog. He was his partner, the only living being who knew his secret. The connection to the local town, a small fishing village named Port Isaac, became a necessary part of his new life. He drove his battered pickup truck into town for supplies, the 40-minute trip a journey back into a world he had tried to leave behind. He kept his interactions brief, his answers to friendly questions short and non-committal. But one person broke through his defenses, a man named George, the elderly owner of the town's hardware store. George was a fixture in Port Isaac, a man with sawdust in his veins and a kindness in his eyes that reminded Alex of his own father. He never pushed, never asked prying questions. He simply provided Alex with the best materials, offered quiet advice on dealing with salt corrosion, and always had a treat in his pocket for Major, who would wait patiently by the store's entrance. "Restoring the old light, are you?" George had asked one afternoon, leaning on the counter. "That place has been empty for as long as I can remember. Takes a certain kind of man to bring it back from the brink." "Just keeping busy," Alex had mumbled, avoiding his gaze. "Well," George said, a gentle smile creasing his weathered face, "sometimes the best way to fix what's inside is to fix what's outside." The words hit Alex with an unexpected force. George saw him. He saw the project for what it was, not a hobby, but a form of therapy, an act of rebuilding a life from its foundations. From then on, their conversations grew a little longer. Alex found himself asking George about the lighthouse's history, about the town, carefully avoiding any mention of Arthur Vance. He learned that the story of the keeper lost to the sea was a local legend, a ghost story told to children. No one suspected anything more. The progress on the lighthouse was slow but steady. The cottage became a home, clean and warm, filled with the scent of fresh-cut wood and brewing coffee. The tower, once a place of shadows and despair, was slowly being reclaimed. This physical transformation mirrored a change within Alex. The stoop in his shoulders lessened. The haunted look in his eyes was replaced by a glint of determination. He was sleeping through the night, the nightmares held at bay by sheer physical exhaustion and a renewed sense of purpose. He was healing, One board, one nail, one day at a time. One sun-drenched afternoon, while clearing the final layer of debris from the lantern room at the very top of the tower, Alex found the next clue. Vance's journal had said, "I have secured the package in the heart of the light." Alex had taken it literally. He'd spent days examining the massive Fresnel lens, the intricate clockwork mechanism that once rotated it, the very pedestal it sat upon. He found nothing. Frustrated, he sat on an old crate, the panoramic view of the Atlantic stretching out before him. Major, who had followed him up the winding spiral staircase, began sniffing at the curved copper wall that housed the lantern. He pawed at a specific spot, just as he had at the fireplace. Alex watched him, a sense of déjà vu washing over him. He ran his hand over the spot. It was a small, unassuming maintenance hatch, one of a dozen set into the copper. But this one, when he examined it closely, had tiny, almost invisible scratches around its handle, as if it had been opened and closed many times with a tool. He fetched a screwdriver from his belt and carefully worked the latch. It was stiff with years of corrosion. He put his shoulder into it, and with a groan of protesting metal, the hatch swung open. The space inside was meant to hold spare wicks and polishing cloths. But tucked away in the back, behind a loose copper plate, was a small cylindrical metal tube sealed with wax. His hands shook slightly as he retrieved it. He broke the wax seal and unscrewed the cap. Inside, rolled tightly, was a set of old brittle blueprints. They weren't for sonar technology. They were architectural plans for the lighthouse itself, but with modifications. A hidden room. According to the drawings, a section of the thick stone wall at the base of the tower behind the coal bunker was false. It was a secret compartment, large enough for a man to stand in, accessible only by a hidden release mechanism located in the cistern that collected rainwater from the roof. Alex stared at the plans, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Arthur Vance, you clever old ghost." He had created a puzzle, a series of locked doors that only a man with patience and a keeper's intimate knowledge of the structure could solve. It was brilliant. The heart of the light wasn't the lens. It was the hidden room at its foundation. As he was rolling the blueprints back up, a glint of sunlight from the parking area below caught his eye. A sleek black sedan, utterly out of place against the rugged landscape, was pulling up the long gravel driveway. Alex's body went rigid. His instincts, honed by years in conflict zones, screamed at him. This was not a lost tourist. A man in a tailored suit stepped out of the car. He was tall, with silver hair and an air of effortless authority. He moved with the predatory grace of a shark, his eyes scanning the lighthouse, assessing it, claiming it. Alex felt a primal surge of anger. This was his sanctuary, his mission, and this man was an intruder. He quickly hid the blueprints back in their tube and secured the hatch. He left his tools and descended the spiral staircase, Major trotting silently at his heels, a low growl already building in his chest. Alex placed a calming hand on the dog's head. "Easy, boy. Let's see what he wants." He met the man on the stone steps where he had, only weeks ago, surrendered his bottle to the sea. The man smiled, a flash of white teeth that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. "Quite a project you've taken on," the man said, his voice smooth as polished marble. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I'm a developer. I've had my eye on this property for years. I'd like to make you an offer." Alex stood his ground, his posture deceptively relaxed, every muscle coiled and ready. Major stood beside him, a silent, furry statue of contained aggression. The dog's eyes never left Thorne. "It's not for sale," Alex said, his voice flat. Thorne's smile didn't falter. He gestured expansively at the crumbling seawall and the wild, overgrown landscape. "Let's be realistic. This place is a ruin. It'll cost a fortune to make it livable, let alone safe. I'm prepared to offer you $750,000, cash." You can walk away from this headache tomorrow, a wealthy man. The offer was tempting. It was more money than Alex had ever seen. It was a ticket out, a chance to start over somewhere new, somewhere without ghosts. But it was also a lie. He thought of Arthur Vance's final journal entry. A developer, he called himself. His eyes were wrong. This was him. This was the man from the past, or perhaps his successor. The same predator, wearing a different suit. I said it's not for sale, Alex repeated, his voice harder this time. Thorne's mask of civility slipped for a fraction of a second. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face before being replaced by a look of magnanimous pity. I understand, he said, his tone condescending. Sentimental attachment, I can respect that, but sentiment doesn't pay the bills. It doesn't fix a crumbling foundation. I'll leave you my card. Think about it. My offer is generous, but it won't be on the table forever. He placed a crisp business card on the stone railing, then turned and walked back to his car without a backward glance. As the sedan disappeared down the driveway, kicking up a cloud of dust, Alex picked up the card. Marcus Thorne, CEO, Thorne Development Group. He tore it into tiny pieces and let the wind carry them out to sea. He knew with absolute certainty that this was not over. Thorne hadn't been trying to buy a property. He'd been probing a defense. He was looking for the same thing Arthur Vance had died to protect. That night, Alex worked with a feverish intensity. He located the cistern on the roof of the cottage, a large stone-lined basin. After draining it, he found the release mechanism described in the blueprints, a small rusted lever hidden beneath a loose flagstone at the bottom. It took all his strength, but with a deep grinding groan, the lever moved. He scrambled down from the roof and raced to the coal bunker at the base of the tower. A section of the stone wall, once seamless, now showed a thin, dark outline. He pushed, and a heavy stone door swung inward, revealing a small, dark chamber. The air that billowed out was stale, untouched for over 50 years. Inside, sitting on a simple wooden shelf, was a heavy metal box. The package. He carried it back to the cottage, his hands trembling with adrenaline. It was locked with a combination dial. There was no note, no clue. Alex's mind raced. Vance would have used something he knew, something personal but not obvious. He looked at the journal, flipping through the pages. The date of the final entry, October 23, 1964, 10/23/64. He tried it. The tumblers clicked into place. The lock opened. Inside, nestled in yellowed cotton batting, was a reel-to-reel audio tape and a small typewritten logbook. Alex stared at it, his heart pounding. This was it. The proof. The reason a good man had been murdered. The legacy he now had to protect. And he knew with a chilling certainty that Marcus Thorne would be back for it. The next 2 days were a blur of tense preparation. Alex knew Thorne's initial offer was just the opening move. The real pressure would come next. He needed to know what was on that tape, but he didn't have a reel-to-reel player. A trip to town was necessary, but the thought of leaving the lighthouse and its secret unguarded made his skin crawl. He couldn't take the box with him. It was too risky. He had to hide it again, but better this time. He resealed the box and returned it to the hidden room, but he also wedged the door mechanism with a small block of wood. It could still be opened from the cistern, but it would take time and effort, buying him a few precious minutes if someone tried to access it. He trusted Major to be his early warning system. The dog seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a quiet, restless vigilance. He patrolled the perimeter of the property, his ears constantly twitching, his nose to the wind. The following morning, Alex drove into Port Isaac. The familiar drive now felt fraught with peril. Every car that passed him on the narrow coastal road seemed like a threat. He went to a small antique shop on the far side of town, a place that sold old maritime junk and dusty relics. The owner, a grizzled man with a sailor's squint, had a dusty, forgotten reel-to-reel player in the back. Alex bought it for $50 cash, along with a power converter for the lighthouse's generator. His final stop was the hardware store. George greeted him with his usual warm smile. "Back for more, are you? At this rate, that lighthouse will be the grandest home on the coast." "Just a few things," Alex said, trying to sound casual. He bought heavy-duty bolts for the doors, solar-powered motion sensor lights, and a spool of high-tensile wire. George looked at the items on the counter, his brow furrowing slightly. "Expecting trouble?" he asked, his voice low. Alex met his gaze. He saw genuine concern in the old man's eyes, not idle curiosity. He made a split-second decision. He needed an ally, however unwitting. "The man who wants to buy my land," Alex said carefully. "Marcus Thorne. Do you know him?" George's face darkened. "I know of him. Thorne Development has been sniffing around this coast for a few years, buying up family plots, forcing people out with lowball offers and legal threats. He's not a popular man in Port Isaac. He's got a reputation for getting what he wants, no matter the cost. You be careful, son. A man like that doesn't take no for an answer." The warning confirmed Alex's fears. He thanked George and drove back to the lighthouse, his jaw set. The threat was no longer a vague premonition. It had a face and a history of ruthlessness. That evening, he set up the reel-to-reel player. With Major sitting sentinel at the door, Alex threaded the old tape and pressed play. The speakers hissed with static. Then a voice emerged, tinny and distorted, speaking in Russian with a heavy accent. It was followed by another voice, this one American, calm and confident. They were discussing schematics, delivery points, payment schedules. Alex didn't need to understand Russian to know what he was hearing. It was the sound of treason. He cross-referenced the dates and call signs mentioned on the tape with the logbook Vance had kept. It was all there, meticulous, undeniable proof. The American voice on the tape belonged to a young naval officer. Vance had identified him in the logbook, Ensign Marcus Thorne. Alex felt a jolt, as if he'd touched a live wire. It was the same man, not a successor, not his son. The same man 50 years later, still trying to bury his original crime. The motive was suddenly crystal clear. This wasn't about money. This was about self-preservation. This tape could destroy the empire Thorne had built over a lifetime. It was the one loose thread that could unravel everything. A sudden, sharp bark from Major shattered the silence. Alex's head snapped up. The dog was on his feet, hackles raised, staring out the newly installed glass pane of the front door. Alex killed the lamp and moved to the window, peering into the darkness. At the end of the long driveway, two sets of headlights cut through the night. They weren't coming closer. They just sat there, watching. A clear, unmistakable message of intimidation. They knew he had found something. Thorne was done asking. The headlights stayed for an hour, two silent, menacing eyes in the dark, before finally turning and driving away. It was a classic intimidation tactic designed to unnerve him, to make him feel isolated and vulnerable. It had the opposite effect. It ignited a cold, familiar fire in his belly, the controlled anger that had kept him alive in places where death was a constant companion. The fight was here. He would not run. He spent the next day turning the lighthouse into a fortress. This was his terrain, and he would use every inch of it. He installed the heavy bolts on the solid oak doors of the cottage and the tower entrance. He rigged the motion sensor lights at key approaches, angled to illuminate any intruders while keeping the lighthouse itself in shadow. He strung the high-tensile wire, thin and nearly invisible in the dark, across the overgrown paths leading up from the small rocky cove on the far side of the property, a perfect hidden landing spot for a boat. It wouldn't stop them, but it would trip them, slow them down, and make noise. He was transforming the site of his healing into a battlefield, using the very tools of its restoration as weapons of its defense. The irony was not lost on him. He was falling back on the skills he had tried so hard to forget. the training that had been a source of so much pain. But now, it felt different. It wasn't about destruction. It was about protecting something vital: Arthur Vance's legacy, the truth, and his own newfound peace. That evening, as he sat cleaning his old service pistol, a weapon he hadn't touched in 5 years, a memory of Sarah surfaced, sharp and painful. They were in their first apartment, arguing about his job. She hated the danger, the secrecy, the man it was turning him into. "This isn't you, Alex," she had pleaded. "This cold, hard man. I want my husband back." The argument had been bitter, and it had been their last. He'd left for a 2-week training cycle that morning without resolving it. 2 days later, while he was away, she was killed. A truck ran a red light, the police report said. A tragic, random accident. The guilt had hollowed him out. The argument, his absence, it was a wound that had never healed. He pushed the memory away, focusing on the slick, metallic feel of the gun in his hands. This was what he was now, the man she had feared, a man who prepared for violence. He had to be. He took the tape and the logbook from the reel-to-reel player. He couldn't risk leaving them in the hidden room again. It was the one place Thorne knew to look for. He needed a new hiding spot, somewhere no one would ever think to search. His eyes fell on the simple wooden cross he had erected on the cliff edge overlooking the sea. He had built it for Sarah, a private memorial in this place of solitude. He'd buried a small box at its base with a few of her things: a photo, a favorite scarf, a book of poetry. With a heavy heart, he retrieved the box. He carefully wrapped the tape and logbook in a waterproof bag and placed them inside, alongside Sarah's mementos. He reburied the box at the foot of the cross, smoothing the earth over it, his hands trembling. He was placing the evidence of one man's crime under the protection of his most sacred memory. The wound and the stakes had just fused. This was no longer about a stranger named Arthur Vance. It was about Sarah. The thought struck him like a physical blow, a sudden, terrifying suspicion. Thorne had a history of ruthlessness. What if Sarah's death wasn't an accident? She was an investigative journalist, always digging into stories powerful people wanted to keep buried. Had she been looking into Thorne development? Had she gotten too close? He scrambled back inside, his mind racing. He powered up his laptop and began a frantic search, digging into Sarah's old article archives, her online footprint. It took hours, but he found it. A series of encrypted emails on an old cloud server he'd forgotten about. She had been building a case against Thorne, linking him to corporate espionage and illegal dumping. The last email, sent the day before she died, was to a trusted editor. "I've found the thread that unravels everything for Thorne. It goes back decades. Something about his time in the Navy. He's dirty and he knows I'm close." The world tilted on its axis. The air rushed from his lungs. It wasn't a random truck. It wasn't a tragic accident. Thorne had killed his wife. The man who was coming for him now, who had haunted this lighthouse for 50 years, was the same man who had shattered his world. The grief and guilt that had crippled him for 5 years transformed in an instant into a white-hot, clarifying rage. This was not about defense anymore. This was about justice. The choice was simple. He could take the evidence and run, disappear, give the tape to the authorities from a safe distance, and let them handle it. It would be the smart play, the logical move. But logic had no place here anymore. This was personal. Running was what the old Alex would have done, running from the pain, the responsibility, the world. The new Alex, the man who had rebuilt this lighthouse, and in doing so, had started to rebuild himself, would stand his ground. This was his home. Thorne had taken Sarah's life. He would not take this from him, too. He would make his stand here, on this cliff, where her memory lived. He would use his skills not as a soldier for a country, but as an avenger for his wife. The storm that had been brewing offshore all day finally broke, lashing the lighthouse with horizontal rain and furious wind. The sea roared, a perfect soundtrack for the tempest in his soul. He worked through the night, his grief channeled into methodical preparation. He knew Thorn wouldn't come alone, and he wouldn't come through the front door. He would use the cove, just as Alex had predicted. He focused his efforts there. He reinforced the tripwires, adding a few old tin cans with pebbles inside, a low-tech but effective alarm system. He found a vantage point in the rocks above the cove, a sniper's nest carved by nature, offering a clear field of fire on the small, stony beach. He wouldn't shoot to kill unless he had no choice. His goal was to incapacitate, to capture, to make Thorn answer for what he had done. His most important preparation was within the lighthouse itself. He thought about how Thorn would breach the tower if his men were delayed at the cove. The main door was now heavily bolted. The windows were too small. He would try the roof of the cottage to get to the second-story door that connected it to the tower. Alex set his trap there. He loosened the floorboards on the landing just inside that door, creating a deadfall onto the hard stone floor below. It was covered with a thin rug, invisible in the dark. Finally, he addressed the light. He had spent weeks painstakingly cleaning the massive Fresnel lens and repairing the clockwork rotation mechanism. He hadn't tested the lamp itself, an enormous, multi-wicked oil lamp that required a specific firing sequence. He found Arthur Vance's instructions in the journal and, with some difficulty, managed to light it. A brilliant, pure white light flooded the lantern room. He then disabled the rotation, fixing the powerful beam on a single point, the path leading from the cove up to the tower. Anyone coming that way would be blinded, silhouetted, a perfect target. Everything was ready. He sat in the dark of the main tower room, his pistol on the table, Major lying at his feet. The dog was a taut coil of energy, sensing the imminent conflict. The storm raged outside, mirroring the controlled chaos Alex had prepared. He wasn't the broken man who had arrived here months ago. He was a hunter, waiting for the predators to walk into his trap. And as he waited, he spoke to Sarah, his voice a low whisper in the darkness. "I know now," he said, the words catching in his throat. "I know what he did, and I'm going to finish the story you started. I promise." The sound came just after 2 a.m., a faint clatter of cans from the direction of the cove, nearly lost in the howl of the wind. Major's head shot up, a low growl vibrating through the floorboards. Alex moved to the narrow-slit window that faced the path, his night vision goggles turning the rain-swept darkness into a murky green landscape. 3 figures, clad in black, were making their way up from the beach. They moved with professional ease, but the tripwire had clearly surprised them. They were scanning the area now, more cautious. Alex waited. He let them get closer, let them believe they were undetected. When the lead man reached a large, flat rock he had designated as a marker, Alex spoke into a small, handheld radio he'd set to a common frequency. "Marcus Thorn," he said, his voice calm and amplified by a small speaker he'd placed outside. "You can stop your men right there. You're not getting what you came for." There was a moment of confused hesitation. The men froze, looking for the source of the voice. Then one of them spoke into his own radio. A few seconds later, Thorn's voice, tinny and laced with fury, crackled back. "You're a fool. You think you can stop me? Give me the tape, and I'll let you live." "You took my wife's life," Alex broadcast, the words hanging in the stormy air. "There's no walking away from this. It ends tonight." He didn't wait for a reply. He flipped a switch. The massive lighthouse beam blazed to life, a blinding spear of light that turned the 3 men into stark, stumbling silhouettes. They cried out, shielding their eyes. In that moment of disorientation, Alex fired. Not at them, but at the loose scree on the cliffside just above them. The crack of the pistol was swallowed by a roar as tons of rock and mud, loosened by the rain, cascaded down, creating a small landslide that blocked the path, separating the lead man from the other 2. It wouldn't hold them for long, but it bought him time. He heard Thorn shouting orders over the radio, telling the 2 cut-off men to find another way up, and the third to proceed to the cottage roof. Alex was already moving. He raced up the spiral stairs to the second-floor landing as the man outside scrambled onto the cottage roof. He heard the heavy thud of boots on shingles, then the sound of someone prying at the door. The old wood splintered. The door burst open. A large figure lunged through the doorway into the darkness of the landing. The loosened floorboards gave way with a sharp crack. The man yelled in surprise and pain as he dropped 10 feet, landing hard on the stone floor below. A sickening snap echoed up the stairwell. One down. But now the other two were coming, their progress marked by shouts and the scrape of boots on rock as they navigated the treacherous cliff face. Alex descended to the main entrance just as a heavy tool, a Halligan bar, slammed against the door, trying to pry it from its hinges. The new bolts held, but the wood groaned in protest. They would get through eventually. He needed to draw Thorne himself. Alex went back to the radio. "Your boys aren't doing so well, Thorne. Maybe you should come yourself. The tape is here. Come and get it." He heard Thorne's enraged response, not on the radio but from outside. He was here. He must have come up a different way. Alone. The side door to the keeper's cottage, a weaker entrance Alex hadn't had time to fully reinforce, crashed open. Alex flattened himself against the wall in the main tower room, pistol ready. Thorne stepped inside, rain-soaked and furious, a pistol in his hand. "Where is it?" he snarled, his eyes scanning the shadows. "You cost me everything," Alex said, stepping out from the darkness. Thorne spun, firing wildly. The shot went wide, ricocheting off the stone wall. Before he could fire again, Major exploded from the shadows. A blur of black and tan fury, the dog hit Thorne's chest with the force of a linebacker, knocking him off his feet. The gun flew from Thorne's hand, skittering across the floor. Thorne roared in pain and rage as Major's teeth clamped down on his arm, but Thorne was strong. He slammed the dog against the wall, trying to break his grip. Alex lunged, not for Thorne, but for the discarded gun. As his fingers closed around it, one of Thorne's men, having finally breached the main door, appeared in the entrance. He raised his own weapon. Alex didn't have a clear shot. In that split second, Major, seeing the new threat, released Thorne's arm and launched himself at the second man, buying Alex the moment he needed. Alex turned his attention back to Thorne, who was scrambling for the tower's spiral staircase. He was going for the lantern room, the last logical place to look for the evidence. Alex pursued him, taking the stairs 2 at a time. They reached the top, the storm-lashed sky visible through the thick glass, the massive, inert lamp dominating the space. "It's over, Thorne," Alex panted. Thorne laughed, a ragged, desperate sound. "It was never about the tape, you idiot. It was about her, your wife. She wouldn't stop digging." He lunged, not with a fist, but with a heavy wrench he'd grabbed from a maintenance hook. He swung it at Alex's head. Alex ducked, the wrench smashing into the brass housing of the lamp mechanism with a shower of sparks. The room plunged into darkness as the main power shorted. They fought blindly, 2 ghosts in the dark at the top of the world, the wind screaming around them. Thorne was fueled by desperation, but Alex was fueled by 5 years of cold rage. He got Thorne in a chokehold, but Thorne broke free, slamming Alex against the glass panes. A spiderweb of cracks appeared. Below, Major had subdued the second man and was holding him at bay. The third was still trapped by the deadfall. The fight was here. Thorne grabbed a shard of broken glass. "I killed her," he hissed, "and I'll kill you." He lunged. At that precise moment, Major, having heard the struggle above, appeared at the top of the stairs. He charged across the room and slammed into the back of Thorne's legs. Thorne stumbled forward off balance, his lunge turning into a fatal forward pitch. He went straight through the cracked glass, his scream swallowed by the storm as he fell to the rocks below. The wail of sirens grew louder, cutting through the pre-dawn quiet. Alex stood on the cliffside, a blanket draped over his shoulders, watching as the local police and the Coast Guard secured the scene. Thorne's 2 men had been taken into custody, one with a broken leg, the other with severe bite wounds. Thorne's body had been recovered from the rocks. It was over. George, the hardware store owner, stood beside him, a thermos of hot coffee in his hand. He had been the one Alex called, the first friendly voice he'd reached out to. George had then called the authorities, vouching for him, telling them Alex was a good man protecting his home. "You did a brave thing," George said quietly, handing him a cup. Alex took it, his hand still shaking. He looked at the lighthouse, its light extinguished, the lantern room shattered. It looked broken again, a mirror of how he felt, exhausted, empty, but strangely, for the first time, at peace. Major sat at his feet, leaning his weight against Alex's leg, a warm, solid presence in the cold morning air. He had saved Alex's life, twice. He was more than a dog. He was family. An FBI agent approached them. "Mr. Jensen," she said, her expression a mixture of professional calm and awe. "We recovered the evidence you directed us to, the tape, the logbook. It's more than we could have hoped for. It not only confirms Thorne's treason, but implicates a dozen others. His entire organization is going to come down, and the information from your wife's files, it closes her case. We know what he did. You've brought a very dangerous man to justice." Alex just nodded, the words washing over him. Justice. It was a word that had felt hollow for so long. Now it had weight. It had meaning. He had finished Sarah's last story. In the weeks that followed, the lighthouse became a hub of activity. Federal agents and investigators came and went. The story was national news, a tale of a reclusive veteran, a 50-year-old Cold War secret, and the fall of a corrupt tycoon. Alex gave them his statement, then retreated back into his solitude, letting the world churn on without him. He used the insurance money from the damage and a substantial reward from the government to begin rebuilding. This time, the work felt different. It wasn't about escaping the past. It was about building a future. He repaired the lantern room, installing new, stronger glass. He fixed the doors and the floors. He and George worked side by side, the old man's quiet company a source of comfort. When the work was done, the lighthouse was no longer a ruin or a fortress. It was a home. He established the Sarah Jensen Foundation for Investigative Journalism, funding reporters who, like her, were willing to speak truth to power. Her legacy would not be one of victimhood, but of courage. One evening, months later, Alex stood in the newly restored lantern room. He fired up the lamp, and this time he engaged the rotation mechanism. A powerful, sweeping beam of light cut through the twilight, reaching out across the dark water, a beacon of hope and resilience. He wasn't just the keeper of the light anymore. He was the keeper of a promise. He walked back down and sat on the stone steps with Major, watching the light sweep across the sea. He had come here to let his own light go out, but in the end, in saving this place, he had saved himself. The ghosts were still there, but they no longer haunted him. They were just memories, a part of the man he had become, a man who had found his way back from the brink, guided by the unwavering loyalty of a very good dog. This story is a testament to the idea that our deepest wounds can become our greatest strengths. It shows that true loyalty, whether from a person or a faithful companion, is a light that can guide us through the darkest of storms. Alex's journey teaches us that rebuilding a broken life, much like restoring a ruined structure, is a slow, arduous process, but one that ultimately leads to healing, purpose, and a peace that is earned, not given. The past can never be erased, but it can be confronted, and in doing so, we can forge a future worthy of the memories we honor. We are so honored you spent this time with us. What did you think of Alex's journey? Let us know in the comments below. Your engagement helps our community grow. Please don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear this story, and subscribe to our channel for more content that celebrates the power of redemption and loyalty. We post new stories every week, and we would be honored to read yours next. Thank you for being a part of our family.